Hello, friends. It's me, Ian Rodriguez, with the 28-day challenge, the 28 days to the Gospel of Matthew. Oh my goodness, we have only 2 more days, 2 more chapters in the Gospel of Matthew. And today we are leading up to the cross of Calvary. Today is the day when Jesus will be crucified for all mankind. And so we are going to start in chapter 27 today. Now, we left off yesterday with him being before the religious council, Caiaphas, the high priest, and all the other religious leaders, and they are now trying to put a death sentence on Jesus. We see Peter has been hiding there, right? Trying to see what's going on. And we see that Peter has denied Jesus 3 times, just as Jesus had predicted before the rooster crowed. So here, the title on chapter 27 in my Bible, again, the Message Bible, is 30 silver coins. So we're probably now going to see what happens to Judas Iscariot. It says, in the first light of dawn. So the rooster crows right when the morning is coming in. So now we see this is Friday. This is the early morning of Friday. The Passover would have started later that eve, going into the evening hours. And so now we're seeing here, this is all transpiring right before they enter in Passover. It says, in the first light of dawn, all the high priests and religious leaders met and put the finishing touches on their plot to kill Jesus. And then they tied him up and paraded him to Pilate, the governor. So now they're here wanting to have Pilate bring down the death sentence that they now, as a religious court system, have tried to hand down to Jesus. But they need Pilate or someone in a governing office above them, because they, even though they are in high standing there and have an authority there, they don't have the final authority. And so they're going to take him before Pilate to see if they can have Pilate then confirm the conviction that they are putting on Jesus in this moment. Judas, the one who betrayed him, realized that Jesus was doomed. I don't think that Judas, the entire time, I think they thought they were going to imprison him, maybe beat him up to shut him up. They didn't realize the full intention of this religious council was to have Jesus killed. That when he handed him over, he was handing him over to those who wanted him dead. I don't think Judas understood that. And so he's seeing that. He's realizing that Jesus is doomed. They're now talking about a death sentence on him. And overcome with remorse, he gave back the 30 silver coins to the high priest, saying, I've sinned. I've betrayed an innocent man. It's hitting him now what he's done. And they said, why do we care? That's your problem. Whoa. Judas threw the silver coins into the temple and left. And then he went out and hung himself. Whoa. This is pretty sobering, is it not? What Judas has now realized, so much so that he takes his life. The high priest picked up the silver pieces, but then he didn't know what to do with them. It wouldn't be right to give this a payment for murder as an offering in the temple. They decided to get rid of it by buying the potter's field and use it as a burial place for the homeless. And that's how the field got called Murder Meadow, a name that has stuck to this day. And then Jeremiah's words became history. They took the 30 silver pieces, the price of the one priced by some sons of Israel, and they purchased the potter's field. Wow, they purchased this grave with those 30 silver coins that were used to betray Jesus. And so they unwittingly followed the divine instructions to the letter. These are people who don't know the prophetic word being fulfilled. They fulfilled it. And the Bible is telling us here that they did this and bought the potter's field in order for those who were homeless to be buried there. And that was a fulfillment of the actual prophecy that Jeremiah gave. Pilate. So Jesus was placed before the governor, who questioned him, are you the king of the Jews? This is Pilate. And Jesus said, if you say so. But when the accusations rained down hot and heavy from the high priests and the religious leaders, he said nothing. Pilate asked him, do you hear that long list of accusations? Aren't you going to say something? And Jesus kept silent, not a word from his mouth. And the governor was impressed, really impressed. It was an old custom during the feast for the governor to pardon a single prisoner named by the crowd. And at that time, they have the infamous Jesus Barabbas in prison. With the crowd before him, Pilate said, "Which prisoner do you want me to pardon? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus, the so-called Christ?" He knew it was through sheer spite that they had turned Jesus over to him. So during this custom of Passover, we see that the governor would have the ability to pardon someone. And so he's saying these accusations really aren't landing in regards to really a reason to put him to death. They've just rioted and they're saying this is what they want, but I'm going to put it before them to really ask them, do you want Barabbas or do you want Jesus crucified? And I'm sure Pilate within himself was thinking Barabbas, who had been sort of a freedom fighter, had been there going against, right, the religious people as well to freedom fight. They would have probably wanted Barabbas more than Jesus. And in the message it says Jesus Barabbas. And Jesus, which would have been more of the terminology of what his name was, Jesus Barabbas, which is sort of this freedom fighter Barabbas. So while court was still in session, Pilate's wife sent him a message. "Don't get mixed up in judging this noble man. I've just been through a long and troubled night because of a dream about him." So actually there was a dream that she had that actually foretold probably the crucifixion. And so she's saying, don't get mixed up in this. Blood is going to be on your hands if you even take part in this at all. Meanwhile, the high priest and the religious leaders had talked the crowd into asking for the pardon of Barabbas and the execution of Jesus. So here they are now trying to coerce the crowd, and they're there trying to convince them that it would be better to let Barabbas go than Jesus. And so the governor asked, "Which of the two do you want me to pardon?" And they said, "Barabbas." "Then what do I do with Jesus, the so-called Christ?" And they all shouted, "Nail him to a cross." Whoa. He objected, "But for what crime?" And they yelled all the louder, "Nail him to a cross." And when Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere and that the riot was imminent, he took a basin of water and washed his hands in full sight of the crowd, saying, "I'm washing my hands of responsibility for this man's death. From now on, it's on your hands, your judge and jury." We see Pilate didn't want to do that. He did not want to kill Jesus. The crowd answered, "We'll take the blame, and we and our children after us." And then he pardoned Barabbas. But he had Jesus whipped and then handed over for crucifixion. Now your Bible may just kind of brush through. They had Jesus whipped. He was whipped with a cat o' nine tails, which is a whip that would have had bones and sharp objects that would have ripped the skin off of his back, would have exposed muscle and bone. This is not just whipped and then handed over to crucifixion like as though it was something small and minimal. No, this would have been a horrific, torturous way. He was actually whipped, we find out in John, 39 times, because 40 would have been almost to kill someone, is what these people believed, the Romans who did this type of torture and punishments. The crucifixion. The soldiers assigned to the governor took Jesus into the governor's palace and got the entire barrage together for some fun. They stripped him and dressed him in a red toga. They plaited a crown of branches of the thorn bush and set it on his head. And I want to stop here. It's not just a crown. It was more like a helmet. It was a crown that they would have put it on his head, and those would have gone into his skull. The thorns would have gone into his skull. It would have been excruciating. They put a stick in his right hand for a scepter, and then they knelt before him in mocking reverence. "Bravo, King of the Jews," they said, "bravo." And then they spit on him and hit him in the head with the stick. And when they had their fun, they took off the toga and put his own clothes back on him. And then they proceeded out to the crucifixion. I'm going to tell you right now, this is extremely difficult to read without crying. It says, along the way, they came on a man from Cyrene named Simon and made him carry Jesus' cross. Arriving at Golgotha, the place they call Skull Hill, they offered him a mild painkiller. This is the cup that I was talking about yesterday, a mixture of wine and myrrh. But when he tasted it, he wouldn't drink it. This would have helped been a narcotic that would have numbed the pain of everything that he had already experienced and was going to continue to experience. And he wouldn't drink it. He wanted to be fully present in the suffering. I want you to understand that Jesus took on the suffering willfully. When he could have taken this numbing agent, he did not. After they had finished nailing him to the cross and were waiting for him to die, they whiled away the time by throwing dice for his clothes. Above his head, they posted the criminal charge against him. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. Along with him, they also crucified two criminals, one to his right and the other to his left. People passing along the road jeered, shaking their heads to mock, lament. You bragged that you could tear down the temple and then rebuild it in 3 days. Remember, this is what the religious priests were saying was blasphemy. This is what Caiaphas was saying. You blaspheme. Now the people are saying, you said that you would do that you would tear down the temple and rebuild it. So show us your stuff. Save yourself. If you're really God's son, come down from that cross. Whoa. The high priest, along with the religion scholars and leaders, were right there mixing it up with the rest of them, having a great time poking fun at him. He saved others, but he can't save himself. The King of Israel, is he? Then let him come down from the cross. We'll all become believers then. He was so sure of God. Well, let him rescue his son now, if he wants him. He did claim to be God's son, didn't he? Even the two criminals crucified next to him joined in the mockery. Wow. Mocking in the sense that he was saying, the two men, get us down from here. If you really are the Son of Man, get yourself down from here. So it's a mocking that they're doing, that really are who you say you are. Then you will remove yourself and us from this moment and this horrific death. From noon to 3, the whole earth was dark. Around mid-afternoon, Jesus groaned out the depths, crying loudly, Eli, Eli, lama shakadani, which means, my God, why have you abandoned me? This is what we call Good Friday. Many of you may go to a Good Friday service that happens at noon, because we know that from noon to 3, the entire world went dark. We think, why would it be called Good Friday? Because it was the greatest act of love that has ever been displayed, that has ever been done for all mankind. Some bystanders who heard him saying, he's calling for Elijah. One of them ran and got a sponge soaked in sour wine and lifted it on a stick so he could drink. And the others joked, don't be in such a hurry. Let's see if Elijah comes and saves him. But Jesus, again crying out loudly, breathed his last. Wow. At that moment, the temple curtain was ripped in two, top to bottom. I want you to think of that. The veil was torn, not bottom to top, where people could hold it. We're talking about a very tall veil in the temple, very thick. I'm talking about thick piece of curtain that could not be ripped by human hands. But not only that, it was so tall that a human cannot reach from the top and the bottom to tear it. It would have been God who tore the veil. Because of this sacrifice, we now have access to God. He tore the veil in the temple. Just like those that were angry who tore their clothes away. This is a symbolic act that we see that God is saying here, as he had to turn his face from his son, as he was now covered in the sin of all humanity. God tore the veil in two. There was an earthquake. The earth begins to shake. The rocks were split in pieces. The earth begins to tremble at what has just happened to the Messiah. What's more, tombs were opened up and many bodies of believers asleep in their graves were raised. Wow. It shook so much that it shook the graves open. Come on. After Jesus' resurrection, they left their tombs, entered the holy city, and appeared to many. They had been asleep. They were dead in their graves. They were awakened in this act of love, this act of redemption, this act of salvation. The captain of the guard and those with him, when they saw the earthquake and everything else that was happening, were scared to death. They're realizing now. They said, this has to be the Son of God. Whoa. It says there was also quite a few women watching from a distance, women who had followed Jesus from Galilee in order to serve him. These would have been those who would have been called disciples. Those who even within the faith had given their life, had given even their livelihoods and money to Jesus's ministry. It says among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the Zebedee brothers, James and John. So we see that in Ephesians what happens. Many people ask, well, what happened to Jesus after he's crucified and this happens? The veil is torn. The earth begins to shake. We see the bodies are being raised, right? Waiting on the ascension of Jesus, and especially after the resurrection. Why? Because Jesus, it says, descended into the belly of the earth. He descended into this place of hell. And there in that place, he was able to cross over to the place in which even those in Noah's time who had denied God and been left behind in the flood, who had died in the flood, he preached to them in the depths of utter darkness, there in the belly of the earth, in hell. Why? So that none should perish. So that none should perish. And in this act of love, it says there, that's what he did. He took on Satan and took back the keys to death, hell, and the grave. How do you think he got the keys? Because he went there. He went there. And in that place, that's what the Bible tells us in Ephesians, is that he descended so that he then could ascend. He descended in humility and in suffering, paid the price for all humanity, for those who would accept him. Then now do not have to go to that place. Those who would acknowledge his blood and be in new covenant with him because of the blood that was spilt, then we now have access to the kingdom, and not to a second death, but to eternal life, resurrection life with him because of what he did in this moment. As the earth grew dim and the birthing pains of what happened in that moment began to happen, and a atomic bomb, as my mom likes to say, happened in hell, we see here that all of this was part of the redemption story. And though there aren't words that are articulated in the Gospels, we know this because of what was revealed when Jesus did resurrect, when he told them where he went. So even though the next verses are about the tomb, we still have 3 days in the belly of the earth. There were 3 days of darkness. They had no idea. I mean, can you imagine? They had no idea when he was talking about the temple being torn down and rebuilt in 3 days, that he was talking about the crucifixion and the resurrection. They did not understand the mystery of that yet. Late in the afternoon, a wealthy man from Arimathea, a disciple of Jesus, arrived. His name was Joseph. And he went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body, and Pilate granted his request. And Jesus took the body and wrapped it in clean linens, put it in his own tomb, a new tomb only recently cut into a rock, and rolled a large stone across the entrance, and then he went off. But Mary Magdalene and the other Mary stayed, sitting in plain view of the tomb. Can you imagine? They just couldn't leave. I mean, it's probably unimaginable what they're feeling and what they're thinking in this moment. After sundown, the high priest and Pharisees arranged a meeting with Pilate, and they said, "Sir, we just remembered that the liar announced while he was alive, after 3 days I will be raised. We've got to get that tomb sealed until the 3rd day. There's a good chance his disciples will come and steal the corpse and then go around saying he's risen from the dead. Then we'll be worse off than before, the final deceit surpassing the first." So they knew that he had been talking about crucifixion and then He was talking about raising from the dead. And so they're now trying to take precaution by putting some extra security in front of that big old stone that's there in the cave that is now a tomb for Jesus. So Pilate told them, you will have a guard. Go ahead and secure it the best you can. So they went out and secured the tomb, sealing the tomb and posting guards. So we know now that this is all part of the plan to ensure that this is the true testimony. There was no possible way that this could have been a hoax, because they themselves took precaution at this tomb to ensure that the disciples didn't try to play a trick on everybody. So that's why it's included here in Matthew that they took the precaution and had guards at the tomb, and they sealed it up really tight. And the stone that was there in front was heavy. It would have taken many men to move. I mean, it was going to take many men to move it to that place in front of the tomb, in front of the opening. And so they take this precaution for a reason, because they say here that the final deceit surpassing the first. And this would have looked extremely bad for them if they'd done this. So now we see here that Jesus has been crucified. He's now descended into the belly of the earth. His tomb, now a new tomb. His body has been laid. A huge stone has been rolled in front of the opening. And guards are at their post. Not just one guard, but several guards are keeping a close watch on the body of Jesus the Christ. What will happen? See you tomorrow, friends.